We had actually only moved our mother and sister away from our father 5 days before he killed them both. We found out on the news app, where we both work in different countries, what had happened. And the first thing that struck us was just confusion, because our father had never been violent towards us. And then the violence seemed to come out of nowhere. He seemed to kill our mother and sister out of nowhere, because we'd always thought domestic abuse was about violence. But it's only since we were in the police station in Spalding, we looked up behind us, and 6 months before, the coercive control legislation came out. And we saw financial abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, all the other mechanisms our father used to control our family. And at that moment, we realized our father's behavior didn't come out of nowhere. He'd controlled us our entire lives, and that control had ratcheted up until he killed our mother and sister. And when you consider murder to be the ultimate act of control, suddenly what seemed to come out of nowhere made perfect sense to us. And that's what we're hoping to raise awareness of.
Yeah, so I think what is key is to understand that coercive control isn't so much what is done to you, but what you cannot do yourself. So our father slowly took away our freedoms. So for one, he kept us financially poor. He wasted and gambled money, so we had no money to spend. And he used that as an excuse why we couldn't go and see friends, why we couldn't take part in sports. And over time, we ended up restricting our own social lives because we felt we couldn't actually take part in friendships in society. And over the decades of that slow abuse, we ended up controlling ourselves and limiting our life. And the reason we moved our mum and sister away from the family home wasn't because we were scared our father would kill them, but because we were scared they could never live when they were in the home with him.
And you
left home, yeah, as Luke said, only 5 days before he killed them. But we found out in the police investigation he was planning on killing all of us for months before we even planned to move out, because that control over our lives, he could see that slowly disappearing because we were able to provide financially for mum and our sister.
So our father almost created a whole system of laws in the house that we had to abide by. And they were designed so we could never meet them. So we always had an excuse to basically just yell at us. So the bus always got in at 4:30, but our father from school, right, and our father always cooked dinner for 4:15. So he either burnt it and then blamed us when we turned up and the food was black, or he'd put it on the plate, ate his, ours was cold, and he would yell at us. And we just couldn't make the bus get there any earlier. But it was those small things where eventually you begin to believe you're the problem because you're always doing something wrong. You're always to blame. All these things are happening that are your fault. And that's what the abuser tells you.
One key issue we want to raise is a stereotype of an abuser is not necessarily someone who's violent, who creates those physical scars and bruises. And also, as pupils, we weren't the snapping, like detention pupils. We were overly compliant and quiet and highly successful, not out of determination, but because we were afraid of failure. And that comes from our home environment where we could not fail at home. That wasn't an option. And so in our school life, we were those same kids who just got our heads down and worked hard because we had no other option. And I think what is key is we need to change the stereotypes we're looking out for in abusers and also victims. Not all victims are going to be aggressive. They might be if they're responding to physical attacks, but our environment was cultivated over decades. So we slowly accustomed and adapted to be able to survive. And so we became, you said, overly compliant and fearful. And that made us safe at home. And that necessarily didn't show itself in school in the stereotypical ways.
That's the thing, is we lived with a murderer for 25 years and didn't know. The services to our family didn't know. Our friends to our family didn't know. Because I think when we talk about domestic abuse, we talk about violence, but domestic abuse is about control. Violence is what abusers use to get control. It's a subset of control. And when you take a step back and talk about control, it all makes sense. And I think that's one of the messages we'd like to convey, is that in the media as well, sometimes the media are part of society, they assume abusers are violent men who are angry, who've lost it, and they're violent out of anger and emotion. But our father was cold-blooded, it was calculated, it was based on beliefs and control.
I urge anyone with any concerns, not only in themselves, but in their friends, to call the National Domestic Violence Helpline and just express what you've seen, because by saying it's not that bad, that's what we said our entire lives, it's not that bad. We kept thinking our lives could be worse. And that's not how people should be living, by thinking it could be worse. We all deserve to live freely and happily. And I think if you are seeing some of those elements that we talk about, talk to the experts and raise your concerns, and don't just live and give in to that life that you may have ended up in.
And also one thing in our case is when women leave, that's when they're most likely to be killed by their partners. So we didn't realise. And actually, if you think you're being abused, don't suddenly leave, because that can trigger that loss of control in the men. They feel that you're leaving is a rebuttal to their control, and that can make you in quite danger.
I think what was key for us was when we lost Mum and Charlotte, we lost our purpose in life. And it wasn't until we started speaking out about a year and a half after the murders that we started to find new meaning. And we started to, I guess, make something good out of what happened. We didn't want our father to win, essentially. Had we just lived a life of regret and sadness, he would have essentially won in destroying our lives too. So what we try to do is live a life which is meaningful, that Mum and Charlotte would be proud of. And I think part of that is speaking out about what we've suffered to hopefully raise awareness. Part of that is how we wrote our own book, Operation Lighthouse, to share our story more widely. And we hope to just go into schools maybe one day, we just talk to anyone who's willing to listen to us, so we can do what we can to hopefully make sure our story isn't repeated again.
3 years, I think 3 years ago, the laws on coercive control were introduced, and that was the case of you and your family.
Raise awareness of coercive control following the case of Lance Hart, who shot and killed his wife Claire and daughter Charlotte after he'd inflicted years of psychological abuse.